Good morning, ninth graders. I hope you're doing good today. I hope you enjoy your weekend. I am gonna manage this class just for today on video because I had some personal affairs to deal with, right? But I mean, it's gonna be pretty much the same structure that we typically follow. Okay, first of all, I want you to go ahead and grab your literature book and open it on page 347. I repeat, page 347. As you can see, the literary analysis for the following story, which is one of the famous Samuel Clemens, who goes by the name Mark Twain, the Invalids story, right? So what we're going to be focusing on in here is the literary analysis for dialogue and dialect. Okay, so I mean, those terms are pretty easy to understand, and in of itself, dialect is the way in which people tend to speak in a particular region that doesn't particularly follow a formal structure. What do we mean by that? Well, let's pay attention to the images in here. Howdy, yo, right? So what's the difference between those greetings? Whenever we hear howdy, we associate it immediately with the cowboy, right? Why? Because that's their dialect. That's the way in which they express their greetings. Howdy, partner. Howdy, stranger, right? That's the way in which they speak, and that's called dialect. And whenever we run into a sort of gangster sort of people, we can hear that they're typically greet us with the yo. Yo, what's up, man? Yo, right? So people from different regions say things differently. As I mentioned, people use different words to say the same thing, right? The example again in here was hello. So dialect is an important thing for authors. Why? Well, because they help develop a character, and it helps the reader sort of visualize better the characters. If you're reading something and suddenly one of the characters, it starts a dialogue, starts talking with the howdy or with the yo, you're gonna get a better sense of who the person is, where is he from, what is he or she or her background, and it gives you sort of a deeper description of the character, deeper understanding of who he or she is, right? Dialogue, as we know, it's a conversation between or among characters in a literary work. Dialogue is usually set off by quotation marks, as we know, or we can simply use the dash, right? A dash is very common as well. A new paragraph indicates a change of speaker, right? So for instance, do you want to go to the movies this weekend? Ask Jane. Then we have a different paragraph, right? Different sentence. No thanks, I have loads of homework to do, I replied sullenly. So we understand that there's a conversation going between Jane and somebody else, right? It's pretty simple, but we need to go through the formalities. So why would an author use dialogue? There are many, many specific and great reasons. Let's go through some of them. To reveal the character traits and relationships, right? By listening, by paying attention to the construction of a dialogue, we can better understand who the person is, as I mentioned, to advance the action of the plot and develop the conflict. Of course, you can use the conversations to sort of tell us what's happening in the story. And by telling us what's happening in the story, the author is developing the plot and getting closer to the conflict or managing the conflict. You know, another important reason is to add variety, color, and realism to narratives. What they mean by this is to add realistic details. So in comparison, dialogue is the words that the characters use, usually set apart with quotation marks. And dialect is a form of language that is spoken in a particular place or by a particular group of people. Right? So for instance, we have one of the most famous, my personal favorite story from Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn, right? And they're having a conversation in here. Let's check out the dialogue in here. We safe, Huck, we safe. Jump up and crack your heels. That's the good old Cairo at last. I just knows it. As we can see, the dialogue in here is pretty easy to identify because it's kind of difficult for us to understand what Jim is saying, right? We safe. Instead of saying we are safe, right? He's saying we safe. Now, this dialect is particular to African Americans before segregation or, during segregation as well. It makes sense because they didn't have access to educational places. They didn't have access to school. At least a big part of them didn't. And that's the way they thought they should speak, right? Instead of saying your, he says yo, right? I mean, we can point out detail by detail, but I think I made my point already. Now, as for Huck, I'll take the canoe and go see Jim. It might be right? So it's different. The dialect is different, and we can see an example in there. Other examples of dialect, hey y'all, like I don't know, dude, I reckon it don't matter, right? These are 3 examples of different sort of dialects as well. Okay, that's with dialect and conversation. Dialect and dialogue and dialect, my bad. All right, now the reading skill, cause and effect. We worked in the previous lesson with cause and effect, so I'm not going to go a lot into detail, but we understand that it's important to understand the causes so we can understand where things are coming from and why do we have this effect. It's only logical. But let's go through the basics again. So a cause is the reason for something happening. An effect is what happened, right? So cause and effects explain why things happen. Some signal words that can help you identify the cause and effect are so, because, therefore, since, if, then, so that, without, cause, effect, how, explain. It's very easy to understand a cause and an effect normally, under normal circumstances. Now, an author can feel pretty creative and go ahead and make it very, very intricate and very sophisticated, in which case you would need to pay a lot of attention to details, right? But it's not going to happen in here. Although we are going to pay attention to details, right? We're going to try to use text details to picture the setting, the characters in action, and use the details of your mental picture. This is important. Your mental picture to help you identify the relationships between actions and events. This is crucial to your reading, right? So for instance, suppose that I'm listening to a conversation between 2 friends. Each speaks in a way, going back to dialogue and dialect, I wanted to mention this. Again, I'm listening to a conversation between 2 friends. Each speaks in a way that shows something about who he is and where he comes from. For example, if one friend says, I reckon you're right, he shows that he comes from a certain part of the country, right? He's speaking the dialect of version of English from that region. That's how they speak like in countries, right? I reckon you're right. When my other friend says, yeah, right, he shows something about himself too. He can be sarcastic, right? Like, yeah, right. When I read a story, I pay attention to the clues clues such as these in dialogue or words characters say to learn more about characters. Fair and simple. Now, moving on. A little bit about Samuel Clemens. So Samuel Clemens went for the pen name Mark Twain, right? He was a very accomplished writer. He has an interesting story. We have already read Mississippi Cup Pilots and other short stories of him and other levels of literature. 8th grade and 7th grade. And as I mentioned, he's a very accomplished writer. Many interesting stories. Now, as for the Invalids story, please go ahead and open your book on page 360 now. 360. We have a vocabulary. Let me go through the vocabulary first. So, obviously, you're going to work with this. We have already the words. Prodigious, deleterious, ominous, judicious, placidly, and desultory. Right? These are the words that we're going to be working with, and as you can observe right away, we're going to be also working with the Latin suffix OUS, right? Which comes in different sort of ways. We have the combination OUS with an I, right? Or just with the no, or, well, we don't have it in here, but also with the U, US, right? Oh, that's why. No, never mind. So there we go. Prodigious is something enormous, right? Deleterious is something harmful to health or well-being. Ominous is something threatening. Judicious is an adjective showing good judgment, something judicious, right? Placidly is something calmly and quietly. Desultory is something random. Those are the words that we're going to be working with. Now, moving on to page 361, as I mentioned. So there you go. You have a little bit more information about Mr. Mark Twain. He has a very interesting story. As for the background of the story, so check it out. Mark Twain wrote this story in 1877 during the American Railroad Golden Age. So the railroad, the train, was like a big thing back in the day, when trains were the dominant form of transportation, by the way, for both people and products. So 12 years earlier, on May the 10th, 1869, the Central Pacific and Union Pacific Railroad lines had been connected in Promontory, Utah. The Transcontinental Railroad was a monumental achievement of engineering that really changed America. It was a huge thing back in the day. It involved laying of around 1,777 miles of track through forests and mountains and across rivers and deserts. I mean, this was truly something impossible to believe. And what had once been a 6-month journey across the nation could now be completed in 6 days. Imagine those dimensions. I mean, it doesn't sound like much now because we can simply grab an airplane and be whatever the heck we want to be in less than 48 hours. Yeah, 48 hours. But back in the day, this was truly remarkable, right? So many authors, and don't be surprised by this, many authors and many aspects in literature are dedicated to those sort of technological revolutions, in this case, the railroad, right? As for the selection, so the Invalids story. Check it out. Death permeates Mark Twain's comic story in a very physical way, right? So death is involved in here in a very physical way. The narrator tells the story of the train trip he takes to bring the body of his newly deceased friend to his final resting place. The narrator and railway expressman suffer intolerably from what they believe is the odor of a decomposing corpse. They struggle in a foul-smelling railway to maintain an unbearable and, as it happens, unnecessary vigil over a dead body, according to the parameters, and conventions in civilized society. I mean, this is very, very fancy. So this guy sets on going to pick up a dead body, right? And he wants to go and bring the body of his friend, and you can imagine all the things that he went through, going in a compacted railroad, and you know, Mark Twain manages to give a humoristic turn to this story, but still kind of weird, right? In a way. Don't get me wrong, though; it's fantastic. So that's that. Okay, this is what you're gonna do. You're simply gonna go ahead and read from pages 363 up until page 370. It shouldn't take you more than half an hour, in all honesty. The reading is pretty accessible. I'm pretty sure that you're going to get it immediately. And afterwards, okay, let me repeat that back to you. Page 363 to page 370, right? Afterwards, you're going to work with the after you read. I'm going to leave you to it and we're going to check it out Wednesday together, just to clarify any possible confusions or questions that might arise in your answering it. But I do need you to upload it. I do need you to do it for today. Okay, the fact that we're going to check it out on Wednesday doesn't mean that you're not going to go ahead and deliver it up until Wednesday. No, you're going to deliver it today. Okay? And that's what you're going to be doing. Now, as for the after you read, it shouldn't take you more than 15 to 20 minutes. So we're talking about, 60, 70 minutes, active minutes. I was planning on leaving you kids a test because we have a test. I have it here already. We're going to start doing it with the little form document because it's faster, right? It can grade automatically and it can give you the answers right away. But I think we're going to leave that for Wednesday. Okay? So in case you have any questions or anything that you might find confusing, please go ahead and send me a message. Thank you so much, kids. Have a wonderful rest of your day.